Hey guys, tonight we're plunging into the rich, tangy, and occasionally deadly world of medieval Italy, where cheese wasn't just food, it was status, power, and a suspiciously frequent reason to draw swords. You're stepping onto a cobblestone street slick with whey runoff, past a sour-smelling alley that hums with the sound of wooden carts groaning under the weight of freshly brined cheese wheels. Above you, laundry flaps between towers built with Parmesan profits. The air's thick with smoke, gossip, and the unmistakable smell of sheep's milk fermenting in the midday sun. And here's your first reality check. If you think this is just going to be about humble dairymaids and quaint markets, think again. Between you and your soft feather bed lies a minefield of guild grudges, curd-based conspiracies, and at least one diplomatic catastrophe involving melted cheese. You probably won't survive this story without stepping on a grudge older than your family tree. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, where are you listening from, and what time is it in your part of the world? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're walking into Bologna in the 1200s. A city-state proud of its university, its crimson roofs, and, oddly enough, its sharp, crystalline cheese. You try to admire the sunset glinting off the fortified towers, but you can't ignore the armed guards stationed around a cheese merchant's stall. And no, they're not there for crowd control. They're there because yesterday, someone tried to assassinate the cheese master with a wedge of poisoned pecorino. This is not the Italy of sun-drenched vineyards and sleepy gondolas. This is a battleground, one divided not just by dialects and borders, but by dairy. Here, a wheel of cheese isn't a snack, it's an economic weapon, a marriage dowry, a symbol of regional pride, and a potential flashpoint in a guild feud that's been stewing since someone's great-great-grandfather switched from cow to goat milk. You pause by a public notice board hammered onto an oak plank. Beneath proclamations about grain prices and upcoming saints' days is a flyer. By decree of the Parmigiani Council, all imports of Modenese curd shall be henceforth banned. Offenders will be stripped of license and flavor. That's right, flavor. Because losing your right to produce or sell cheese in this city is like being excommunicated and blacklisted from every dinner table worth attending. See, back then, cheese wasn't just cheese. It was politics. Guilds, those medieval business clubs that ran trades like stonemasonry, weaving, and yes, cheese-making, held immense sway over their cities. And in Italy, where cities like Florence, Siena, and Milan functioned like independent kingdoms, guilds didn't just regulate their craft, they enforced it like a religion. Each guild had its own rules, rituals, and often militias. And cheese guilds? They were especially fierce. One historical record from Lucca details a week-long street brawl after a renegade cheesemaker sold unaged cheese as aged 12 months, a crime treated more seriously than minor theft. According to local accounts, 3 buildings burned, 1 bishop was nearly trampled, and the offending cheesemaker was dunked in whey and exiled to the hills. Historians still argue whether the punishment was legal or just a particularly creative case of mob justice. As you turn the corner toward a bustling dairy hall, the scent of warm milk and wood smoke wraps around you. Inside, it's dim, crowded, and hot. Burly men in woolen tunics shout over the bubbling vats. Hanging from hooks are ropes of herbs and dried rennet bladders. A guild master oversees it all from an elevated dais, scribbling into a parchment ledger the size of a modern-day suitcase. You glance at his ring, a wheel-shaped insignia etched with a tiny sword. This man doesn't just test curd, he can approve or ruin entire family lineages. There's something spiritual about the way he eyes the cheese. His nose dips close to a freshly turned round. He frowns. The room falls silent. One twitch of his brow could mean someone's lost a month of labor, or a lifetime of reputation. You can practically hear the apprentices sweating. Then, a nod. A sigh of relief rolls across the hall like a breeze through a vineyard. And then, the stories start to flow. You overhear an old man mumble about the siege of Canestrato, not a military siege, but a city-wide embargo when a rival town flooded the market with cheaper sheep's cheese. The retaliation? A midnight raid on the competing guilds' drying racks. Hundreds of wheels vanished overnight, only to reappear 6 months later, rebranded with a different seal. Bold? Yes. Petty? Incredibly. Illegal? Probably. But effective? Absolutely. A passing friar snickers, telling of a case in Cremona where 2 guild apprentices fell in love across enemy cheese lines. Think Romeo and Juliet, but with curd instead of curses. Their secret meetings involved sharing aged fontina beneath a cloistered garden, until they were discovered and sentenced to 5 years of separation by dairy. And perhaps most bizarre of all is the tale of the Ferrarese cheese duel. 2 rival masters, equally aged and equally stubborn, settled a pricing dispute by staging a contest. They each selected 1 wheel, brought it to the town square, and let their cheeses battle by being dropped from a tower. The winner? The one that bounced the highest. Spoiler, the loser's apprentice was never seen again. Historians still argue whether this bizarre event was symbolic or sincerely believed to reflect cheese quality. You step back into the night, the moon now casting pale silver over the market. It smells faintly of thyme, smoke, and cow's milk. You've only been in Italy for a few hours and already the world of cheese feels like a labyrinth of pride, law, and strangely poetic violence. And we're only just getting started. You're leaving Bologna now, winding down a narrow path that smells like wet stone and roasted chestnuts. The sun rises over patchwork hills, each stitched together with olive trees, vines, and grazing animals that all seem to have extremely strong political opinions about cheese. It's the 13th century, and you're beginning to understand that geography here isn't just landscape, it's destiny. And in this part of Italy, the animal you milked often dictated the alliances you formed, the enemies you inherited, and the flavor profile of your personal wars. You pass a bleating goat tied outside a modest farmhouse and nod politely to the old woman stirring curds in a soot-darkened pot. Her village backs goat cheese. They always have. Just a few miles down the slope? Cow loyalists. Keep walking? You'll hit sheep territory. And no, they don't get along. In modern times, we might smile at regional cheese preferences as charming cultural quirks. In medieval Italy, they were as serious as land claims. Different climates and elevations supported different dairy animals. Mountain towns raised goats and sheep, rugged beasts well suited to the alpine terrain. Valleys and river plains favored cattle, which demanded more water, flatter fields, and richer feed. The result? Cities and villages began to stake their entire culinary identities on what their animals could produce. You reach the outskirts of Parma. Here, cows rule. Big ones, mostly white with sleepy eyes and important-sounding grunts. They produce rich, fatty milk, perfect for aging into the city's pride, Parmigiano. You see young boys hurling soft balls of curd between them while their mothers laugh from the stalls. But don't let the wholesome scene fool you, these are cheese loyalists in training. One local tale tells of a border hamlet where a cow herder fell in love with a girl from a neighboring sheep village. On their wedding day, the two sides agreed to serve a neutral cheese made from mixed milk. According to the story, the guests tolerated this diplomatic wedge, until someone found out the bride's uncle had snuck in an unapproved batch of pecorino. A cheese riot broke out. Several guests fled into the woods. One guy got brined. Again, historians still argue whether this ever happened or whether it's just regional slander retold by smug cowside descendants. By this point, you've figured out that the animal mattered. Not just for taste, but for trade. Cow's milk spoiled fast and required local processing into durable cheeses. Goat's milk traveled better and lent itself to smaller, village-based economies. Sheep's milk was versatile and nutritious, often used by monasteries and mountain herders with strong connections to the church. These production distinctions hardened into civic identities. You weren't just a cheesemaker, you were a cowman of Parma, a goat guildswoman of Liguria, or a sheep curer from Casentino. These weren't job titles, they were vows. Walk another few hours and the dialect changes. You're now near Siena, where goats and sheep commingle like unlikely roommates. The cheeses here are softer, herbier, less aggressive on the tongue. The people? A bit more flexible, until you insult their mix ratios. One wrong comment about too much goat tang, and you could find yourself publicly shamed with a will around your neck. It's called the collar of curds. Humiliating, yes, but effective. Back in the cities, the guilds reflected this natural divide. Florence, known for its political complexity, had at least 4 different cheese-related guilds by the early 1300s, each aligned with different dairy sources and defending their production methods with alarming rigidity. You might think a goat cheesemaker and a cow cheesemaker could collaborate for mutual profit. But no. Mixing milk was considered impure by many purists. In fact, one 1298 regulation from the Florentine Guild of Cow Affineurs bans milk meddling and calls goat milk a product of deviant pastures. You pass by a city wall covered in faint graffiti, only sheep milk is sacred. Another, down with cow brutes. Someone else has scrawled over that in red, brutes? Try buttery kings, you bleating pests. It's like a medieval Reddit thread, only with better penmanship and significantly higher risk of being stabbed. Of course, there were exceptions. Some places tried to bridge the divide. Venice, ever the merchant opportunist, dabbled in everything. They imported cheeses from all over the peninsula and tried to create a neutral dairy market. But even that drew ire. One traveler's account describes a cheese ambassador from Pisa spitting on a Venetian table when served a plate of mingled milk samples. His quote? "This is an insult, not a tasting." And here comes the most delightful paradox. Despite all the clannish pride and dairy nationalism, many of these cheeses tasted remarkably similar. Sure, the microbial terroir changed things, and yes, the animals left their mark, but to an outsider, it's all funky aged something. Still, for those who lived it, these differences were the stuff of city legends and family legacy. There's a charming but obscure document housed in a convent archive near Arezzo that lists regional cheese traits like they are horoscopes. Capricorn? You prefer crumbly goat's cheese. Leo? You demand aggressive salt content. Pisces? You secretly want to ferment your feelings into a mild sheep's milk blend. Is it satire? Probably. But people copied it into prayer books. That says something. And here's your quirky gem for the evening. In a small Tuscan town known only as Ficarolo, it was tradition to judge a potential spouse's worth by their ability to identify animal milk by taste alone. The test? Blindfolds and a 3-cheese gauntlet. Success earned respect. Failure meant you'd be politely told to marry further north. So yes, this wasn't just about pasture economics or mouthfeel. It was about where you belonged. And in a fragmented Italy of warring city-states and rival loyalties, cheese became a cultural compass. Not everyone could read or write, but everyone knew how to argue over the superiority of their ricotta. You settle for the night in a hillside barn, the animals snoring gently around you. Somewhere in the distance, you hear a cow lowing proudly and a goat responding with what sounds suspiciously like sarcasm. You wake to the earthy scent of hay and the slightly less poetic aroma of barnyard politics. Morning mist hangs like gauze over the hills, and as you lace up your boots, a village bell rings, a summons not to prayer, but to the weekly meeting of the local cheese guild. You rub your eyes and stretch. Time to watch bureaucracy get funky. You arrive at the town hall of San Gorgonzio, a place you've likely never heard of, unless you're deeply invested in blue-veined dairy scandals. The building looks like a church married a wine cellar. Columns, candles, and banners hanging from the rafters, each bearing the symbol of a different dairy clan. One features a goat perched smugly atop a wheel. Another, a solemn cow framed by olive branches. A third, more ambitious banner shows an entire cheese wheel with a sword stabbed through it, dripping what might be brine or blood. The artist left it ambiguous. You find your seat among spectators and try to stay invisible. Guild meetings were technically open to the public, but only in the same way a courtroom allows observers. They expect silence, awe, and absolutely no sudden laughter. This particular session is tense. A dispute has erupted over a new mold strain introduced by the Gruyere Envy faction of the local cow milk coalition. See, Gruyere wasn't Italian. It came from Switzerland, which was exotic, alpine, and allegedly full of cheese monks with supernatural senses of smell. And while Italy had no shortage of its own legendary curds, some guilds began to experiment. They tried aging in alpine caves, adjusting the humidity, even importing foreign starter cultures. To the guild traditionalists, this was heresy. To the progressives? Innovation. One man, a florid-nosed elder in a robe that smells like cave-aged ricotta, slams his wooden gavel and shouts, "We will not bow to Swiss boars." The room erupts. You catch fragments of outrage, betrayal of flavor. Brine traitor. Who even has the gall to ferment with foreign fungi? It's a lot. You begin to suspect the real issue isn't about mold. Here's where things get juicy. By the 1200s, cheese guilds had evolved beyond mere craft collectives. These were powerful, semi-political institutions that governed production rules, enforced quality standards, issued licenses, collected fees, and, importantly, decided who got to succeed. They had initiation rituals, secret recipes, and sometimes even their own armed escorts. And in a city-state where local pride ran hot, cheesemakers who defied the guild weren't just breaking rules, they were starting revolutions. You lean in as a scribe unrolls a parchment listing the complaint. Brother Bernardino did unlawfully create a rindless cheese using Gruyere techniques, imported rennet, and, most scandalously, cow milk infused with lavender. The gasps are audible. Lavender? In cow milk? You'd think he'd drop-kicked a bishop. Historians still argue whether these guild fights were driven by true culinary philosophy or just raw market greed. Was it really about purity and tradition? Or were these old cheese lords just protecting their monopolies? It's not entirely clear. What is clear is that cheese had become a luxury commodity, and the guilds knew it. In cities like Florence, Pisa, and Milan, certain cheeses became high-status exports. Their aging techniques, region of origin, and guild seals turned them into prestige items. Owning a wheel of aged Parmigiano in 1270 was a flex akin to rocking the medieval equivalent of Gucci. Merchants gifted it to secure trade deals. Diplomats offered it as tribute. Some lords even stored wheels in fortified vaults. Yes, cheese banks were a thing. At this point, you might be wondering, were the guilds always this intense? Short answer, no. In the early Middle Ages, cheese was mostly a rural, domestic affair. Women made it at home, monks perfected it in cloisters, and surplus was bartered at markets. But as cities grew and trade intensified, demand soared. And where there's demand, there's control. That's when the guild stepped in. And not just to protect the cheese. They protected the process. They created pages upon pages of production codes, what temperatures to maintain, what tools to use, how many hours to age a cheese, which type of salt to employ for brining. Coarse sea salt from Sicily was preferred, unless you were from Genoa, in which case you hated Sicilian salt on principle. They also enforced social hierarchy. Want to sell cheese in the city square? Better be a full guild member. Want to become a member? You'd need years as an apprentice, letters of recommendation, a demonstration of your cheese sense, that's a real term used in some guild charters, and a fee payable in coin or, ironically, cheese. One fringe tradition from Ravenna required apprentices to present a trial cheese to the council, crafted by hand over 30 days using only local ingredients and cured in a personally dug pit. If the wheel passed inspection, you were in. If not, back to stirring curds and cleaning basins. The political games grew, too. In Siena, a particularly ambitious cheese guild lobbied for seats on the city council. They argued, convincingly, that cheese taxes made up 14% of local revenues. Eventually, they secured a spot, becoming one of the first food-related guilds to enter actual civic governance. Their first motion? More market stalls for cheese vendors, fewer for fishmongers. Fish Guild was not pleased. Here's a fun bit of fringe lore. In 1321, the Milanese Cheese Guild tried to bribe a local astrologer to declare cheese under the sign of Jupiter, hoping it would boost public perception of its expansive, generous qualities. The astrologer agreed, for a fee, and for a few years, astrologically themed cheese wheels became a trend among Milanese nobility. It was cheese with star power. Back in San Gorgonzio, the lavender infusion debate has been tabled for another session, and you sneak away before someone gets creatively exiled. Outside, the street buzzes with carts full of rinded rounds, scamorza dangling like pale balloons, and traders boasting about the superiority of their brining techniques. It's a strange kind of marketplace, a blend of culinary pride, legal drama, and mild fermentation. You munch on a hunk of crusty bread someone hands you and reflect, cheese here isn't just food. It's currency. It's identity. It's the hill you're willing to die on, preferably aged 18 months and turned twice a week. You're back on the road, the soles of your boots tacky with whey runoff and civic anxiety. The winding track before you cuts through vineyards and farms, where the cows look judgmental and the goats practically sneer. You pass a hand-carved milestone that reads, Monte Bianco, home of the true wheel. You suspect True is doing a lot of heavy lifting. As you approach the town gates, a market unfurls like a Renaissance Pinterest board. Baskets overflow with figs and almonds, and wooden slabs grown beneath wheels of cheese in every imaginable hue. Ivory, gold, ash gray, even one suspiciously marbled with green swirls that might be mold, or an artistic flourish. A wiry man in a saffron cap yells, 8-day ricotta, blessed by Saint Lucilla herself. You don't even ask how or why a saint would bless cheese, but the locals seem to buy it, literally. You duck into a stall run by a woman named Violetta, whose apron is stenciled with the cow silhouette sigil of the local guild. She's kneading a fresh batch of curds while gossiping with a neighboring sheep vendor about a recent guild wedding gone wrong. They served buffalo mozzarella at a goat wedding, she whispers with a scandalized gasp. Unthinkable. You nod gravely, as if this is the gravest offense you've ever heard. It's here in Montebianco that you realize how deeply cheese culture bleeds into ritual and celebration. Births, marriages, feast days, even funerals, there's a cheese for that. The birth of a child? Ricotta, served warm with honey. A wedding? Braided provola, symbolizing union. A funeral? A dense, aged pecorino eaten in silence, because nothing says grief like crumbly tang on a stale crust. Medieval Italians didn't just consume cheese, they performed it. Imagine attending a midsummer fair where the highlight is the blessing of the milk, complete with an ox-drawn parade, chants to Saint Galaxia, patroness of lactation, of course, and a ritual in which the town elder smears fresh curd on the mayor's forehead to ensure a prosperous aging season. It's weird. It's sincere. It's very, very damp. And yes, some of these traditions feel theatrical today, but in a time when much of life was dictated by natural rhythms and celestial signs, these rituals anchored communities. They turned cheese from a foodstuff into a focal point of spiritual and emotional life. You weren't just eating to survive, you were eating to honor, to grieve, to wed, to harvest. And sometimes, to flex. Take the cheese crown, for example. In coastal towns like Pistoia, there was a midsummer contest where local guilds competed to construct elaborate headdresses made entirely of cheese. The winners marched through the square in wheel-laden tiaras while a choir sang a hymn written entirely in dairy puns. The loser? Publicly bewailed, a ritual in which their cheese crown was dramatically removed and eaten by pigeons. Historians still argue whether these cheese pageants were purely celebratory or whether they masked deeper tensions between rival guilds. Were the crowns just decorative, or did they contain hidden messages, encoded symbolism about alliances, trade secrets, or milk source purity? Some say yes. Others say you're overthinking it. But then again, those same historians get very animated when you bring up rind thickness, so who's to say? And then there's the case of Saint Antonio de Cassiofficio, a semi-apocryphal monk reputed to have fasted for 77 days on nothing but goat cheese and rainwater. His legend inspired the spring abstinence, a brief cheese-only Lent observed in parts of Tuscany in the 1300s. Clergy were suspicious, but the locals insisted it was a form of holy fermentation. Fringe? Definitely, but still practiced in remote hill villages to this day, according to one exceptionally moldy scroll found in a monastery attic. You step inside the Montebianco Guild Hall, where preparations are underway for the curd benediction, a seasonal rite in which the year's first vat of milk is stirred counterclockwise while the town baker recites a line from Virgil and a child gently rings a bell shaped like a dairy cow. It sounds quaint, but there's an underlying tension in the air. The Cow Guild is pushing for exclusive rights to the ceremony this year, citing recent goat-related indiscretions. You hear someone mutter, "If they get the bell again, I'm moving to Lombardy." And speaking of goats, remember them? Fierce, headstrong, mountain-loving goats? They have their own rituals, often more rustic, wilder. In the hilltop hamlet of Scarnino, goat herders host an annual festival called La Razzola, where villagers roll enormous rounds of goat cheese down a steep ravine. Whoever retrieves the least damaged will win a winter's supply of whey. It's part sport, part ritual, part insurance policy. Bruised shins are expected. Broken ribs are a badge of honor. Even the church had a complicated relationship with cheese culture. On one hand, monasteries were early innovators in cheesemaking, Cistercian and Benedictine monks developed aging methods still used today. On the other, certain theologians fretted about cheese as a symbol of indulgence. One 1278 sermon declared, "A tongue that praises Gorgonzola is a tongue distracted from God." Harsh words, but then again, Gorgonzola is very distracting. Despite the occasional papal side-eye, cheese-making saints began to appear in stained glass windows. You even spot a fresco in Montebianco's chapel depicting the Virgin Mary extending a wedge of cacio to a crowd of peasants. It's tender, it's theological, and slightly absurd. But that's medieval Italy for you. And here's your offbeat tidbit for the night. One town, San Cassiotto, held an annual trial of the cheese, where a selected will would be placed on a ceremonial stool and questioned by the town elders. A young boy would act as cheese interpreter, pretending to relay its testimony. If the cheese was judged honest, meaning properly aged and not overly salted, it was blessed and shared. If not, it was hurled from the tower. Performance art? Punishment? Honestly, both. As evening settles over Montebianco, lanterns flicker in shop windows and the scent of baked cheese wafts from every door. You wander through the streets, watching children carve little animals from curd, while elders tell stories about wheels that saved villages and brines that healed wounds. You lean against a warm stone wall and take it all in. Here, cheese isn't just edible, it's seasonal, ceremonial, even sacred. And in a world shaped by cycles of feast and famine, there's something oddly comforting in that, a reminder that even the simplest food can anchor us in time, place, and meaning. A cockerel crows, late but assertive, as you stretch awake in a barn turned in with a view of the foggy Umbrian hills. You blink into the soft light and catch a whiff of ash, pine, and something tangy, cheese being smoked nearby, no doubt. It's time to move again, onward to the town of Castellaccio, where, you've heard, a cheese dispute once escalated into actual street violence. Yes, it's that kind of morning. Your mule clip-clops through narrow switchbacks as olive trees sway above like gossiping old ladies. Castellaccio sits stubbornly atop a hill, its fortifications still bearing the scars of past skirmishes, some of which, according to locals, had less to do with foreign invaders and more to do with Parmesan adulteration. You arrive to find the town divided. Literally. The northern district, called Rota Alta, boasts round cheeses with deep, firm rinds, aged in sun-dried caves. Their gilt banner, a circular shield with a wheel at its center, flanked by laurel. To the south, curved streets and open courtyards filled with tangy, soft cheeses aged in olive baskets. Their gilt crest? A triangle of cheese held aloft by two doves. Poetic, passive-aggressive, entirely intentional. You pause in the central piazza, which is eerily symmetrical, one side paved in limestone, the other in terracotta. Even the fountains mirror each other, one shaped like a cow, the other like a U. A local baker notices your confusion and sighs. It's been like this for centuries. All because of brining preferences. You nod solemnly, because of course. Here's where we dive into the cheese war of Castellaccio, a micro-conflict that flared in 1317 and became the textbook case of dairy-fueled politics. It began, as most bad ideas do, with an innovation. The Southside cheesemakers started mixing cow's milk with sheep's milk. This fusion created a new texture and flavor that rapidly gained popularity among younger merchants and aristocratic foodies, the medieval equivalent of a viral trend. Naturally, the North was furious. They accused the South of bastardizing tradition, diluting the integrity of their age-old methods, and, worst of all, undercutting prices. Guild meetings grew tense. Trade routes through the town were manipulated to favor one faction over the other. Then came the sabotage. A shipment of northern wheels was mysteriously found floating in the town's aqueduct, riddled with holes and unusually salty. Worms claimed the south. Sabotage spat the north. Things escalated. By autumn, Young men from rival districts had begun to carry sharpened cheese knives not for slicing, but for defense. Street chants evolved from guild slogans into war cries. One fateful night during the harvest festival, an actual brawl broke out. Wooden carts overturned, wheels used as shields, and one particularly zealous teenager reportedly launched a full wheel of pecorino like a discus across the square. Historians still argue whether this event should be classified as a riot, a guild skirmish, or just the world's weirdest food fight. Regardless, the podesta, town magistrate, had to step in. His verdict? A temporary cheese ceasefire. No cross-milk experimentation, no poaching of customers across districts, and, this was real, no cheese-themed taunts during public festivals. The ruling was engraved and mounted in the town hall, where it remains today. But here's the kicker, the conflict didn't die. It just changed form. Rather than open violence, the rival guilds began what scholars now refer to, somewhat dramatically, as the Cheese Cold War. Each side doubled down on their methods, branding, and export strategies. The North emphasized legacy, purity, and civic pride. The South leaned into innovation, fusion, and urban sophistication. Both sides started issuing cheese certificates of authenticity, which were little more than glorified wax seals affixed to wheels, but it worked. Buyers became emotionally attached to their chosen faction. This microcosm reflected a larger pattern across medieval Italy, localized identity wrapped in layers of flavor, fermentation, and guild-backed snobbery. Every town claimed to be the birthplace of something crucial. Every guild insisted theirs was the original method. And every variation became a cultural flag, waved furiously in the face of outside influence. Some towns, like Castellaccio, embraced the competition. Others, like nearby Pian del Latte, chose unity over pride. There, cow and sheep milk were blended without shame, and cheeses bore dual crests representing both guilds. But of course, Pian del Latte was labeled by its neighbors as the compromise town. You imagine local teens muttering, "I'm not eating neutral cheese, mum." Back in Castellaccio, you wander into a modest museum housed in an old aging cave. It's cool and musty, with arched ceilings and stone racks lined with display cheeses preserved in wax. One plaque reads, "Conflict Cheese, a Reconstruction." It's an exact replica of the infamous hybrid wheel that started the 1317 feud. It looks innocent enough. You try not to laugh, but a dissent glares at you. Respect the cheese. There's even a diagram outlining the factional influence over time, complete with painted graphs showing which decade favored which blend. One bar labeled 1340 to 1350, the soft cheese renaissance stands proudly, flanked by miniature sheep figurines. It's adorable and slightly terrifying. Your quirky tidbit for today? During the height of the Castellaccio tensions, one anonymous bard composed a scandalous ballad called The Brine Betrayer, which was banned by both guilds for being irreverent, misleading, and dangerously catchy. Of course, it became wildly popular in taverns. The chorus? He aged his lies with cow's sweet kiss and salted truth with goatly hiss. You hum it under your breath as you exit the museum. Walking through the narrow lanes, you pass guild headquarters still proudly displaying their banners. A boy hands you a flyer for the upcoming Wheel Showdown, where judges will blind taste regional samples and declare a winner. It's fair this time, the boy insists. We switch judges. You doubt it, but admire the optimism. As twilight settles over Castellaccio, you sip a lukewarm goblet of whey wine and watch locals gather in the piazza. A mandolin plays softly in the background. The tension between districts is real, but beneath it lies something else: passion, pride, a refusal to let their version of cheese vanish into mediocrity. You get it. In this world, cheese isn't just food. It's memory, rivalry, and above all, identity you can eat. You wake the next morning to church bells and the low groan of a donkey braying in protest, possibly at being used to haul 200 pounds of cheese uphill the night before. Today's path winds eastward through a densely wooded stretch of central Italy known to locals as Bosco Formaggioso, or the Cheesewood. Whether that name is literal or metaphorical remains unclear, but the birds are chirping and the air smells like thyme and mushrooms. You trudge on. Your destination is a cluster of hamlets collectively known as the Valle dei Cassari, the Valley of the Cheesemakers. Unlike the brawling cheese titans of Castellaccio, this region is known for its labyrinthine web of tiny, fiercely independent guilds. Dozens of them. Some so obscure they don't even appear on most maps. And yes, they all feud. Constantly. You arrive in the first hamlet, San Formaggino, just as a small crowd is gathering around a wooden platform where a man in a blue felt hat is loudly accusing someone of way tampering. His voice echoes across the green. Your rennet is suspiciously consistent, Gianni. A woman beside him mutters, he's just bitter about the prize goat escaping last year. Apparently, that goat was the ceremonial taster for the annual trial of the crust. This, you discover, is normal here. The Valle dei Cassari is a case study in what happens when you take a basic human instinct, tribal identity, and ferment it in sheep's milk. Each hamlet has its own guild, and each guild has its own rules, rituals, and signature cheese. You meet guild leaders with titles like Master of Curds or Grand Brinekeeper. One group in Fontecapra even elects a ceremonial cheese oracle each spring, a child chosen for their allegedly superior sense of smell. You're told the current oracle is 9, solemn, and refuses to eat anything except raw fennel and hard cheese. Power does things to people. Now, here's the historical backbone of all this chaos. By the 12th century, much of Italy was governed by city-states and local fiefdoms. Central authority was more of a suggestion than a rule. Within this fragmented political structure, guilds became de facto regulators, not just of economic practices, but of cultural identity. And in the Valle dei Cassari, where the land is fertile and the grazing lush, cheesemaking became the central economic engine. So naturally, the people took it extremely seriously. Historians still argue whether these guild divisions were driven more by personality clashes or by genuine differences in production techniques. Some point to subtle variations in aging. One group buries wheels in ash pits for 2 weeks, another wraps them in fig leaves and sings to them. Others suggest it's all just stubbornness disguised as tradition. Take for instance the feud between the villages of Rocca Mole and Croce Bianca. Both produce a semi-soft, herb-rubbed cheese from mixed milk. The difference? Rocca Mole uses wild mint, while Croce Bianca insists on lemon thyme. That's it. Just the herb. Yet for 3 generations, marriages between the 2 villages were frowned upon. One priest even refused to bless a union until the couple agreed to host a neutral herb reception. Spoiler, they went with rosemary, and both sets of grandparents boycotted. You find yourself in a shaded glen where 5 neighboring guilds are holding what they call a peace festival, basically a public cheese market thinly disguised as reconciliation. You sample delicate slices from each stall, a sweet, nutty wedge aged in walnut leaves, a crumbly sheep's cheese with hints of juniper, a soft round whose rind smells alarmingly like wet bread but tastes divine. One old cheesemaker from Borgo Cascio offers you a tidbit wrapped in waxed linen and tells you it's from a protected cave, as if that explains anything. When you ask what makes the cave so special, he simply winks and says, "You wouldn't understand." You believe him. You chew in silence. Here's your quirky tidbit of the evening. In 1322, a rogue cheesemaker named Lazzaro Pecorelli attempted to create a unified cheese charter for the entire valley. It proposed standard weights, salt percentages, and a shared code of ethics for guild conduct. It was immediately rejected by every guild, violently in some cases. One delegation reportedly held stale curds at his house for a week. Lazzaro fled the region and later opened a tavern in Florence called The Way Out. Good name, poor timing. The issue wasn't that his charter was bad, it was that no one in the valley wanted to give up their edge. Cheese, after all, was power, reputation, and even more importantly, smugness. Imagine telling someone from Colsolato that their mold bloom isn't authentic. You might as well insult their mother, their saint, and their cow in one breath. By dusk, you're seated on a wooden bench beside a stream, sipping spiced whey and nibbling on a pungent wedge offered by a chatty teenager named Federico. He tells you his family's cheese, La Nebbiolina, is named after the morning fog that rolls through their pastures. My great-grandfather said the cows milk better when they can't see each other. He grins. You can't tell if he's joking, but you nod appreciatively anyway. The guilds here may be fractured, but they're also layered with centuries of stubborn brilliance. Despite the feuding, or maybe because of it, they've created some of the most diverse and inventive cheeses in Europe. Each variation is a declaration. This is who we are. And don't you dare make it with lemon thyme. Just before bed, you overhear a group of elders arguing over whether the moon phase actually affects cheese fermentation. It's the waning crescent that gives the best texture, insists one. Absolute nonsense, another grunts. It's the position of Jupiter. You lie back, stare at the sky, and imagine a universe where cheese and stardust hold hands. In the Valle dei Cassari, anything feels possible, so long as no one tries to homogenize the milk. Your path now takes a gentle southern curve, winding through soft hills quilted in vineyards and dotted with cypress trees that stand like watchful sentinels. The sun is warm on your back, and your pack smells faintly of last night's rind-heavy dinner. You hum a verse from the Brine Betrayer as you descend into the next major stop on your journey, Montepellaro, a city-state once infamous not for its cheese, but for how it regulated cheese. This is where you meet the taxmen. Montepellaro isn't known for the number of guilds, just one, actually, but it's legendary for bureaucracy. Imagine Venice's flair for contracts, mixed with the emotional range of a courtroom drama and the smell of warm dairy. It all started in the late 1200s, when the ruling magistrate, Sir Filippo del Monte, decided that the city's cheese had to reflect its values, precision, order, and zero nonsense. To that end, Montepellaro established the Consiglio del Latte, or Council of Milk. A dozen men and women, robed in grey wool and sporting pins shaped like cheese wedges, were responsible for evaluating every wheel, wedge, and curd before it could be sold or exported. Their word was law. And their standards were brutal. Cheese deemed too salty? Burned in a public fire pit. Too crumbly? Fed to pigs. One historical account tells of a merchant who tried to sneak in an unaged wheel by disguising it as a melon. It made it as far as the plaza before being unmasked, seized, and declared an offense to all palates. You pass by the old Consiglio building, now a museum. Inside, displays showcase confiscated wheels and parchment scrolls filled with cheese rulings written in florid Latin. One scroll reads, "Let it be known that the batch from quarter 8 lacks cohesion of body and harmony of scent. Thus, unworthy." Historians still argue whether the council's methods improved quality or merely enforced elitism. The logic behind the council wasn't entirely flawed. Montepellaro had an important location, situated along a trade route that linked Florence, Siena, and parts of southern Italy. That made its cheese a high-demand commodity. With great butterfat came great responsibility. But instead of relying on market forces, Montepellaro imposed strict laws about who could produce, age, and sell cheese. To become a certified cheesemaker, you had to serve 7 years as an apprentice, then pass a multi-tiered test administered by the council. The test included identifying mold types by scent alone, citing fermentation principles from memory, and slicing a perfect wedge blindfolded. One applicant fainted during his exam and was still awarded partial credit for style. Your quirky tidbit of the day? The council once employed a cheese whisperer, a man named Cosimo Spintorelli, whose job was to listen to cheeses aging in the caves and report on their auditory health. He believed that well-aged wheels made a contented crackle sound as their rinds hardened. When asked how he knew what discontented cheese sounded like, he simply replied, "You'll know when you hear it." And people just accepted this. The rules didn't stop at production. Montepellaro was also the first known city to tax cheese differently based on aroma intensity. Stronger cheeses paid higher levies under the Olfactory Burden Act of 1309. The reasoning? Powerful scents traveled farther and advertised themselves more easily. Therefore, they owed the city for their natural marketing. It gets better. There was also a drip law, mandating that soft cheeses wrapped in cloth must not leak oils onto market stalls. Violators were fined and forced to publicly scrub the stones of the piazza, a punishment referred to, rather poetically, as the washing of the shame. You pass the square where this happened, its paving stones still slightly discolored. Or maybe that's just the brine residue. Despite, or perhaps because of, this obsessive control, Montepellaro cheese gained fame across the peninsula. It was consistent, firm, nutty, and dependable. Merchants loved it. Nobles ordered it by the cartload. Even the Pope allegedly sent an envoy to secure an annual wheel quota. But therein lay the problem. Other guilds, particularly those from less rigid cities like Castella Fresca, resented Montepellaro's monopoly on predictability. "It's not cheese," one rival cheesemaker grumbled, "it's performance art." Tensions simmered. Allegations were made that Montepellaro agents had tried to discredit rival cheeses with false reports of spoilage. At least one documented case involved a sabotaged cart where another city's wheels were slathered with fish oil. It was obvious, a guard testified. No real cheese should smell like anchovy tears. By the mid-14th century, the council began to lose sway. Other cities started resisting their licensing demands. A consortium of guilds from Lucca, Assisi, and Ravenna banded together and declared a free cheese pact, refusing to recognize Montepellaro's quality seals. Montepellaro retaliated by issuing counterfeit warnings and even embargoing wheels with unauthorized aroma profiles. Sounds silly, but it worked, for a while. But as trade routes evolved and merchant power grew, Montepellaro's cheese hegemony cracked. Their council's authority became more symbolic than regulatory. Today, they still issue ceremonial licenses to local cheesemakers, but mostly for tradition's sake. You meet one young artisan who holds up his certificate and laughs, "It's just for my grandmother's approval." What remains, though, is a unique reverence for cheesemaking as governance. Montepellaro's legacy proves that, in medieval Italy, cheese wasn't just sustenance, it was a civic institution. Something you could regulate, litigate, and ritualize. You end the day sipping barley tea on a stone step beside the river that curls through the city like a lazy thought. The water glistens gold in the setting sun. Somewhere nearby, a cheesemaker sings softly to her wheels as she wraps them in linen. You listen closely, trying to catch the sound that Cosimo once described, the contented crackle of an aging rind. Nothing yet. But maybe, just maybe, you'll hear it tonight. By now, your boots are fully broken in and your nose can distinguish between sheep's milk and goat's milk from across a courtyard. That's either talent or a symptom of prolonged exposure, you're not sure. Either way, your next stop is one of the most eccentric, least cooperative, and arguably most delightful corners of medieval Italy, the hills of Monte Formica. This region isn't governed by a city-state, nor does it host an official guild. Instead, it's ruled, informally but absolutely, by a confederation of rural cheese-making families who refer to themselves as I Formicari, or the Ant People. Why ants? Because, as one old woman tells you while scrubbing a moldy wheel with wine vinegar, we build our empire crumb by crumb. Also, she adds, we bite. The Formicari are more of a cheese cult than a guild, if we're being honest. They don't elect leaders. They don't hold meetings. They hold ceremonial tastings, which involve large bonfires, chanting, and something called the Rind Parade. You witness one such event and watch a man in a full cloak made entirely of dried cheese rinds strut around a bonfire while others hum in low harmony. No one explains it to you. No one needs to. Unlike Montepellero's obsession with rules, the Formicari thrive on intuition. Cheese here is made the old way, by feel, by scent, by ancestral whisper. Recipes are oral, passed down from grandmother to grandchild while stirring curds barefoot in copper pots. Measurements are delightfully imprecise, a handful of salt, unless the wind is strong. And aging? That depends on how the cheese feels about being left alone. Despite this chaos, or because of it, Monte Formica's cheese is phenomenal. It's earthy, layered, often wrapped in herbs gathered from cliffside gardens. You sample a goat's cheese aged in clay urns and lined with rosemary ash. Another is encased in beeswax and tastes like caramelized sage. The Formicari don't care what you think of their cheese. Which makes it even better. Here's your mainstream historical anchor. In many parts of rural Italy, especially during the 13th and 14th centuries, formal guild structures didn't reach. Geography isolated hill communities, and without roads or reliable messengers, centralized authority simply couldn't enforce standards. These communities developed their own cheese-making cultures that were deeply localized, passed through generations without ever entering a written charter. Historians still argue whether groups like the Formicari resisted outside control out of cultural pride or sheer logistical convenience. Some claim they were fiercely independent out of principle, others suggest that living hours from the nearest tax collector simply made it easier to ignore the rules. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. Take, for example, the peculiar standoff of 1347, when a delegation from a city guild attempted to educate the Formicari on proper mold control. They arrived with scrolls, diagrams, and a bucket of official rennet. The locals responded by burying the scrolls in a compost pile and using the rennet to flavor soup. The message was clear: thanks, but no thanks. A local tale, possibly exaggerated, but charming nonetheless, describes a Formicari matriarch who once disguised her best cheese as a rock to avoid paying tariffs. When a tax officer demanded a sample, she invited him to lick the boulder, and then chased him off with a ladle. Her wheel, now known as Pietramite, is still produced and always comes misshapen, on purpose. You spend the afternoon with a family whose youngest daughter, Francesca, has been entrusted with the summer aging shelves, a series of wooden planks in a wind-cooled barn overlooking a chestnut grove. She shows you how they rotate each wheel according to how tired it looks. You ask what that means. She shrugs and says, some days, cheese just wants to nap. In the Formicari way, even mundane tasks are ritualized. You witness someone softly tapping wheels with a feather to check their dreams. Another sings lullabies in the barn at twilight. There's no irony, no pretense. This is simply how it's done. If it works, it's valid. Your quirky tidbit for this stretch? In 1362, an amateur scholar from Siena spent a season living among the Formicari to study their methods. He returned with a treatise titled Cheese and the Soul, Notes from the Hill. In it, he described a rind blessing ceremony in which wheels were anointed with chestnut honey and danced around in circles for emotional stability. Critics in Siena dismissed it as rural nonsense, but modern anthropologists are fascinated. One even called it early evidence of psychogastronomy, the belief that food reflects emotional states. As evening approaches, you follow the locals to a ridge where the entire community gathers to taste the first batch of autumn cloud, a semi-soft will aged in burlap and wild sage. The elder presiding over the tasting breaks off a piece with her fingers, sniffs it deeply, and murmurs, "It is slightly mournful." Good. You nod, unsure whether that's a compliment. What strikes you most isn't the cheese itself, though that's divine, but the atmosphere, reverent, communal, and full of weird, radiant joy. There's no competition here, no formal seals, no angry letters about fermentation etiquette. Just people who believe cheese is a living thing worth honoring. You stretch out on a wool blanket as the stars blink alive overhead. A gentle breeze carries hints of thyme and smoke. Francesca is beside you, explaining how the moon affects their curd-pulling rhythm. You don't understand every word, but you understand the feeling of rhythm, of tradition, of a process older than ink and paper. Tomorrow, you'll re-enter more regulated lands, with guild laws and secret councils and city feuds. But for tonight, you're among the Formicari, the ant people, who build their kingdom one soft wheel at a time. And if you wake with cheese rind in your hair, well, that's just how they say hello. Your descent from the hills of Monte Formica feels like a return to earth after drifting in a pleasantly dairy-scented dream. Gone are the sage-wrapped wheels and lullabies for cheese. Now you hear hammering, voices raised, bells clanging. Welcome to Castello di Sang, Blood Castle. Don't worry, no one's bleeding. Probably. Castello di Sang got its name from the red-hued limestone of its central fortress, but it earned its reputation through cutthroat cheesemongering, quite literally at times. Here, in the shadow of high battlements and looming spires, the cheese guilds weren't just competitive. They were militant. You step into the narrow, soot-darkened streets where vendors still shout prices over one another, and banners in faded colors hang above you, symbols of guilds that once warred over who had the rights to milk from specific valleys. And not just war as in snarky pamphlets or cold shoulders at market. No. This was swords drawn, armored goats in the streets kind of war. You pass a rusted iron gate with a mural overhead, a wheel of cheese split like a shield, flanked by two cows wearing chainmail. You chuckle. The locals don't. This was serious stuff. Back in the 14th century, Castello di Sang hosted no fewer than 5 cheese guilds, each representing a specific technique or milk source. There was the White Horn Guild, cow's milk, brined in wine, the Vinebark Syndicate, goat's milk, aged in hollowed grape trunks, the Salted Eye, specializing in smoked cheeses, the Church of the Risen Rind, a semi-religious cult that claimed to resurrect spoiled wheels, and the Copper Curdsmen, buffalo milk, fiercely territorial. These groups didn't share recipes, resources, or respect. They built towers, hired spies, recruited bards to slander rival cheeses in ballads. One infamous ditty included the line, "Salted Eye's cheese has wept more than your ex-wife." It was a hit for years. And yet, somehow, Castello di Sang functioned. Each guild controlled a different sector of the city, enforced its own cheese codes, and maintained heavily guarded cellars. A wheel from the wrong district crossing into another could trigger what they called a curd clash. Local records describe one such event in 1328, where 3 city blocks burned after a goat named Lucia wandered into Whitehorn territory carrying illicit curds strapped to her back. She survived. The curds did not. Your mainstream historical moment. Unlike modern unions, medieval Italian guilds often operated more like rival corporations than cooperative professional associations. While some cities encouraged unity, others, especially ones with fractured leadership like Castello di Sang, let rival guilds splinter and evolve into deeply entrenched factions. Control over resources meant control over power. And cheese, as we've established, was serious currency. Historians still argue whether Castello's guild warfare stifled innovation or paradoxically fueled it. On one hand, each faction jealously guarded its processes, making cross-guild learning difficult. On the other, the intense rivalry led to some of the most creative and extreme cheese-making in the region. For instance, the Weinbach Syndicate pioneered fermentation using crushed fig bark as a mold accelerator. No one else dared try it. And your quirky tale for tonight? The infamous Siege of the Seven Rhines. In 1341, the Saltadi locked themselves inside their production hall after a Whitehorn merchant accused them of using pig lard in a supposedly vegetarian cheese. Instead of surrendering, the Saltadi released wheels down the street like spiked barrels, some of which exploded in brine. Witnesses claimed it smelled like angry ocean feet. Eventually, the city magistrate intervened by declaring a temporary truce and made both guilds publicly eat each other's cheese under supervision. Awkward. You tour one of the old guild houses now turned into a tavern. Its stone walls are still scarred from small fires and sword marks, and a crooked wheel-shaped chandelier hangs from the ceiling. The bartender serves you a sliver of Weinbach blue cheese and leans in, whispering, "This one's illegal in 2 provinces." You pretend not to hear that last part as the creamy, musky flavor melts across your tongue. As you walk the city at twilight, you notice that old divisions still hum beneath the surface. Some streets subtly display guild colors, faded but preserved. Cheese stalls still categorize their goods not just by type, but by legacy. This one's Church of the Rhine style. One vendor tells you, lifting a waxed will that smells of cinnamon and smoke. Came back from spoilage twice. You decide not to ask what that means. What's remarkable, though, is that despite its fractious past, Castello di Sang now thrives on its history of conflict. The city hosts an annual Festival of the Fallen Wedges, where locals reenact historic cheese skirmishes using foam wheels and elaborate pageants. Kids wear paper rinds as crowns. Adults chuckle over lines like "Defend the Dairy Wall." Tonight, you sit on the ramparts overlooking the darkening city. Below, music rises, fiddles, drums, a few people singing about a brave little curd who chose love over salt. A cheesy ballad, in every sense. You smile and wrap yourself tighter in your cloak. Because here's the thing, in Castello di Sang, cheese wasn't just food. It was identity, territory, legacy. A wedge could be a banner, a rind, a badge of honor. And as ridiculous as it sounds, the guild wars here shaped the very soul of the city. Above you, the stars blink in approval. You nibble your last piece of outlaw blue, letting its stingy richness linger on your tongue like a secret. Somewhere nearby, another tavern bursts into laughter. Maybe over a song. Maybe over a memory. Or maybe over the very idea that someone, somewhere, once tried to trademark the phrase "blessed by the brine." By the time you've licked the last of that contraband blue from your fingertips, your boots are once again dusty, your satchel smells like 20 different dairy philosophies, and your map leads you northeast, into the tangled, swamp-fringed valleys of Parma Vecchia. But don't let the reeds and sleepy mist fool you. Beneath this foggy calm lies one of medieval Italy's most cunning cheese turf wars. Parma Vecchia is not to be confused with the Parma of Parmigiano Reggiano fame, though they are distant cousins. This is the older, more reclusive Parma. The Parma that didn't bother with papal endorsements or emperor grants. The Parma that saw laws and said, "That's adorable." Here, the Cheese Guild wasn't just a trade organization. It was a secret society. You arrive as dawn breaks over the wetlands. The air is thick with peat and fermenting hay, and every breeze seems to whisper, "You didn't hear this from me." In the heart of the marsh sits an old granary turned archive, where documents were hidden for centuries in hollowed loaves of stale bread. You peek inside one and find an ancient cheese ledger, written in code. Because that's how the Guild of the Hidden Rennet worked. They called themselves Illinois Calio Nascosto, and their motto, whispered, never written, was "Flavor is power." These weren't open-market cheesemakers hawking wheels from pushcarts. These were shadowy figures who aged their cheeses in underground vaults, smuggled starter cultures in candle wax, and embedded secret recipes into church murals using iconography only they could read. It's like the Illuminati, but their rituals involved cow's milk. Their flagship cheese, known today as Ombra Vecchia, Old Shadow, was a semi-firm wheel aged in terracotta urns packed with wet straw and sage leaves. But back then, it went by many names, each one used to throw off rival spies. Midwife's Dream, Brick of the East, even just Fred. Clever. Your mainstream historical anchor tonight? In the 13th and 14th centuries, many trade guilds operated in dual capacities, publicly providing goods, privately engaging in economic espionage. In cities where commercial success meant political clout, trade secrets became fiercely protected. This was especially true in the food industry, where flavors could define a city's entire reputation. Cheese, like glass in Venice or silk in Lucca, became both an export and a weapon. Historians still argue whether Illinois Calio Nascosto ever actually governed Parma Vecchia or merely operated behind the scenes. Some believe they held real power, bribing local officials and staging accidents to remove competing dairy farmers. Others think their influence was exaggerated by local folklore and the occasional wheel of exceptionally good cheese. Either way, their mythos remains intact, largely because they wanted it that way. Your quirky fact? In 1373, a cheese merchant from Bologna reportedly went mad after trying to infiltrate the hidden rennet. He claimed the initiation involved eating an entire wedge of garlic-rubbed Ombra Vecchia in complete silence while staring at a goat statue's eyes. When asked what the statue revealed, he whispered, "The Rhine sees all," then passed out. The goat statue still stands in the guild's abandoned hall. And no, you're not supposed to touch it. You spend the afternoon navigating Parma Vecchia's twisty alleys and marsh boardwalks, following a trail of odd cheese markers, carved rinds left on doorsteps, a stone tower shaped like a cheese press, and a chapel whose stained glass windows depict scenes of cows being gently serenaded. You meet an old woman who insists she's the last initiate of the guild. She offers you a taste of her private stock, sharp, woody, with a strange sweetness at the end, like basil and burnt sugar. You ask how it's made. She winks and says, "With memory." The guild's codebook, now partially deciphered by scholars, includes phrases like "scrape only during waning moon," "rotate counterclockwise if the milk hums," and "never name a wheel after someone you love." Poetic, confusing, and somehow not entirely unscientific. You duck into a half-collapsed warehouse where former vaults still stand, great, brick-lined chambers sunk into the earth. The air inside is cool and pungent, and you can still see the rusted hooks where hanging baskets once swung slowly in the dark. Here, cheese wasn't just aged. It was watched, guarded, tended like a sleeping spell. One stone shelf still holds a fossilized wedge, rock-hard, green at the edges. A local historian calls it the eternal crumble, rumored to be the last untouched ombra vecchia. No one dares cut it. You just look, bow your head, and step away. Even in its heyday, the Guild of the Hidden Rennet never advertised. You either knew someone, or you didn't. Their influence wove through the region like mist, not seen, but always present. When a rival guild once tried to replicate Ombra Vecchia, their entire cellar flooded. No storm, no burst pipe. Just water. Unexplained. Locals call it the curd curse. As night falls, the marsh fills with crickets and distant croaks. You sit by the water's edge, unwrapping a small wedge the old initiates slipped into your bag. It smells ancient and strangely floral. You take a bite. It's dense, introspective, like a flavor that's already read your thoughts and decided to wait before revealing its full self. You chew slowly as the stars begin to bloom overhead. Here in Parma Vecchia, cheese wasn't sold. It was whispered, and the echo still lingers in every reed, every soft ripple of brackish water, every wall with a cow carved too subtly to notice at first glance. You wrap the rest carefully and place it back in your satchel. For the first time on this journey, you feel like you're not just passing through history, you're carrying a piece of it. Carefully, quietly, like the Rhine sees all. As the marshes of Parma Vecchia recede behind you, your journey pulls you northward toward the stone-paved streets of Milan. But you're not heading into the center of the grand city itself, not today. No, today you're trekking toward a peculiar place on the outskirts, where the cheese guilds of Milan engage in a rivalry not over flavor, but over something far stranger, the art of cheese sculpture. Milan, after all, was home to some of Italy's greatest minds, artists, engineers, philosophers, and, strangely enough, sculptors of cheese. This particular tradition, once a proud art form, has mostly been forgotten today. But in the 14th century, it was the pinnacle of prestige and an extravagant display of both culinary and artistic prowess. You arrive at the foot of the ancient Lombard guild hall known as La Formigella, where the streets bustle with vendors selling all manner of cheeses, from the famous Gorgonzola to the lesser-known Sicchio's Grumble, a pungent creation so fierce it's said to change your mood with every bite. But here's the catch, these aren't just normal cheeses. They are art. That's right. You've wandered into the Milanese Guild's world of formaggio scultura, or cheese sculpture. For centuries, Milan's guilds had mastered the ability to shape soft, delicate cheeses into intricate designs, birds with their wings unfurled, delicate human figures with braided hair, and even entire reproductions of the Duomo, all crafted from curd, rennet, and imagination. It wasn't just about making the cheese taste good, it was about elevating it to an art form. The story goes that during the early days of this peculiar art, Milan's wealthiest guild members would host grand banquets where cheese sculptures were the centerpiece. The pieces were often elaborate, surreal depictions of mythology, allegories, or even scenes from the latest political intrigue. The more intricate the sculpture, the more respected the guild became, and thus the better their standing in Milan's social hierarchy. Your mainstream historical anchor for today, the Milanese, like many in Italy, saw food as much more than sustenance. It was a symbol of wealth, prestige, and power. In the 14th century, the market for exotic foods and luxury goods was booming. Cheese, often served in large, lavish amounts, became a vehicle for both status display and a medium for creativity. Cheese sculptures were seen as a way to publicly display one's wealth, just as marble statues or golden chalices did. Historians still argue whether cheese sculpture was a form of simple decadence or whether it served a deeper social purpose. Some believe it was a fleeting trend fueled by the aristocratic desire to distinguish themselves from common folk, while others think it was a genuine artistic expression, an early intersection of food and fine art. Either way, it ended when the price of the best curd became prohibitively expensive, and many guilds turned to simpler forms of cheese production. You wander through the guild's open-air market, try not to laugh at the enormous, cheesy replica of a well-known local politician, his face slightly droopy and a bit too melty. You overhear a local baker complaining that the politician's nose collapsed under the pressure during the final sculpting stage. Another vendor proudly displays a wheel of cheese carved into the shape of a dancing bear. It's clumsy, but impressive in its own way. You are about to ask a nearby sculptor how he achieved that level of realism when a man in a gold-embroidered cloak gestures for your attention. He introduces himself as Vincenzo, one of Milan's last remaining cheese sculptors, and invites you to witness his magnum opus, the Gorgonzola Madonna. You follow him into a small, dimly lit room at the back of the hall, where, indeed, there sits a Madonna figure, completely composed of Gorgonzola cheese. It's a strange sight, not unlike a surrealist painting. The folds of the Madonna's gown are carefully detailed, each crease and contour emphasized by the blue veins of the Gorgonzola. Her face, serene and almost lifelike, is captured in creamy white cheese, while her halo is a delicate ring of parmesan, and her hands are outstretched, as if offering divine cheese itself. As Vincenzo explains, this particular piece took him 2 months to craft, 2 months of careful work, precise temperature control, and an understanding of the delicate balance between cheese and art. It is, he claims, a masterpiece that will last only for the duration of the current moon cycle. After that, it will slowly begin to melt, inevitably returning to its original form, a humble wheel of Gorgonzola. There's something beautiful and fleeting about it. Just like art itself. You tell him you'll be back to see it before it melts, and he gives you a knowing look. You should, he says. But remember, everything melts. Even cheese. Quirky tidbit for this segment? The Milanese sculptors had an infamous competition called La Grande Formaggio, a yearly event where guilds would compete to create the most extravagant and detailed cheese sculpture. One year, a sculptor from a rival guild created an entire scene of the Last Supper, using different varieties of cheese for each character. The piece was so elaborate that it was rumored to have inspired the renowned painter Leonardo da Vinci in his later work. Art and cheese, after all, have always been inextricably linked in this city. As you leave La Formigella, the smell of melting cheese in the air, you think about the fleeting nature of the craft. Sculptors and artists may toil for months on their creations, but in the end, it's all temporary. The artistry, the skill, the craftsmanship, all destined to fade with the passage of time. There's something comforting in knowing that, even as these masterpieces melt, they'll never truly disappear from memory. They'll live on in stories, in impressions, and, most importantly, in the hearts of those who tasted them. Before you head back to your quarters, you pause one last time to gaze at the sculptures lined up in the window. They may be melting, but they are still full of life, full of cheese, full of creativity. And you, dear traveler, will carry their flavor in your memories long after they are gone. Leaving Milan behind, you turn your path southward, past the fortified gates of the city and into the gently rolling hills of the Tuscan countryside. Here, amid the vines and olive groves, you'll find yourself in a quiet, almost forgotten hamlet, Monte Cassio. Its name, meaning Cheese Mountain, is a subtle hint to its hidden legacy. A legacy entwined with ancient dairy traditions, buried deep within the town's rich history of feuds and favor. Monte Cassio has never made headlines. No grand sculpted cheeses here. No legendary cheese curds, not even the prized Parmigiano Reggiano or Gorgonzola. But what Monte Cassio had was something far more insidious, a cheese-hoarding empire. You arrive just as the golden light of sunset catches the edges of the hills. A stone-built village sprawls before you, with narrow lanes, terracotta rooftops, and the faint scent of herbs and hay hanging in the air. But something's off. The streets are eerily quiet. No bustling market. No chatter from neighbors. Just the low hum of cicadas and the soft swish of the breeze through grapevines. You follow the winding path until you reach the heart of the hamlet, where a stone wall encloses a large courtyard. Inside, there's a long-forgotten fortress, an imposing, weathered structure with a tall, ivy-clad tower. This was once the home of the infamous Cassio Consortium, a secretive, wealthy syndicate who controlled all cheese production in Monte Cassio. And not just any cheese, this was the cheese of the land, the rare, creamy, pungent variety known as Cassio dei Monti, a cheese so good, so coveted, that the consortium's grip on it became legendary. For centuries, they controlled both the land's finest dairies and the means by which the cheese was distributed. They hoarded the secret recipe, which, rumor has it, involved rare herbs picked only at dawn and a pinch of volcanic ash, providing a tang so unique it was worth its weight in gold. Their monopoly was ironclad, and their power was unshakable. You step into what's left of the old consortium headquarters, your footsteps echoing against stone walls that seem to sigh under the weight of years. Dusty shelves are lined with ancient cheese molds and faded records. A few remnants of Cassio dei Monti still linger on one shelf, sealed in glass jars. You approach, taking in the aged, almost reverent air of the place. Historians still argue whether Monte Cassio's rise and fall was purely the result of this cheese monopoly or if the consortium's brutal methods were what truly brought the village to ruin. The records suggest that the consortium's methods were less than benevolent, forcing locals into debt with inflated prices, using espionage to sabotage competing cheesemakers, and threatening anyone who dared to share their secrets. The political ramifications were immense. Powerful families outside Monte Cassio sought to control the consortium's monopoly, while others simply wanted to expose it. War after war was fought, not on battlefields, but in marketplace intrigues. Quirky tidbit for tonight? One local legend tells of a daring young cheesemaker from a nearby village who infiltrated the consortium under the guise of an apprentice. His name? Leonardo the Curda di Santini. According to the story, he worked his way into the consortium's inner circle by secretly introducing an unexpected ingredient into Cassio dei Monti, truffle oil. The combination was so powerful, so overwhelmingly delicious, that it sent the consortium into a panic, fearing the collapse of their market dominance. They eventually expelled Santini from the consortium, but not before his accident led to a temporary supply glut of truffled cheese that local villages still speak of fondly today. But while the consortium was consumed by infighting and jealousy, something even more insidious was happening. The ancient, sacred knowledge of Cassio dei Monti was being lost. With each generation, fewer people knew the proper techniques. Fewer still had access to the sacred herbs and volcanic ash needed to recreate it. One evening, after a local cheese fest held in a nearby villa, you sit with the town's oldest resident, a woman named Rosa, who carries the weight of generations in her eyes. She tells you that the consortium's final blow came not from outside forces, but from within. The final heir, a young man by the name of Giulio, was more interested in flaunting his family's wealth than maintaining the quality of their cheese. He began cutting corners, substituting lesser ingredients, even adding preservatives. The once legendary Cacio dei Monti started to lose its magic. By the time other villages caught on to the inferior product flooding the markets, the damage had been done. The consortium's influence crumbled as quickly as it had risen. Today, Cacio dei Monti is considered a lost cheese, and the consortium's stronghold is a ghost town of sorts, frozen in time, forgotten by most, except for those few who still dream of what it once was. Rosa, who claims to have been one of the last apprentices to learn the craft of the lost cheese, speaks softly of the secrets. She tells you of an ancient vault hidden beneath the village, rumored to contain the final recipe. She says it's waiting for someone brave enough to rediscover it. But as you sip your wine and listen to the flickering sounds of crickets outside, you're left with the haunting thought that some things are better left untouched. Some legacies, no matter how delicious, were never meant to endure. That evening, as the stars fill the sky above Monte Cacio, you sit on the steps of the old tower and look out over the valley. The wind stirs the fields of wheat and olives, and for a moment, you can almost taste the lost cheese of the mountains. It's sweet, earthy, full of life, and yet, like so many treasures of the past, destined to fade. What remains is not the cheese itself, but the stories, the memories, woven into the fabric of Monte Cacio's history. The scent of its past lingers in the air like the faintest aroma of cheese, carried on the wind for those who are still willing to seek it. With the night silence heavy upon you and the faintest tang of Cacio dei Monti still lingering in the air, you find yourself continuing southward. The hills of Tuscany stretch before you, and soon you arrive in the bustling, sun-drenched streets of Florence. The city's unmistakable beauty, its soaring cathedral, its cobblestone alleys, and the glistening Arno River cutting through the heart of it, calls to you like a beacon. But there's no time for sightseeing today. No time for marveling at the art galleries or the magnificence of Brunelleschi's dome. No, your destination lies in the shadow of Florence's grand facades, a modest, weathered building tucked between the lively markets, known as the Formaggio di Fiesole Guild. Florence is no stranger to cheese. After all, this is the birthplace of some of Italy's most famous cheeses, like Pecorino Romano and ricotta. But the Guild of Fiesole holds a different, much darker distinction. It was once the center of a notorious cheese-related crime ring. Yes, you heard that correctly. Cheese crime. But to understand the depths of this criminal enterprise, you must first learn of the unique cheese, Fiesole Bianco, which was unlike any other. Produced exclusively in the hills surrounding Florence, Fiesole Bianco had the remarkable ability to age into a creamy, buttery texture while still maintaining the sharp bite of a much older cheese. Its flavor was revered, its production closely guarded. So tightly, in fact, that when it first hit the markets, the Formaggio di Fiesole Guild established strict regulations about who could sell it, who could distribute it, and, most importantly, who could buy it. The guild's code was ironclad, and it said that anyone who violated their sacred cheese contract would meet a most peculiar fate. You see, the guild didn't just make cheese, they controlled it like the most valuable treasure. To them, Fiesole Bianco was not simply a product, it was a power play. And the guild's most infamous activity wasn't about cutting corners in cheese production or stealing recipes, it was about forging exclusive, fake Fiesole Bianco wheels and selling them at exorbitant prices. The crime ring behind the guild created counterfeit cheeses that were shaped, wrapped, and presented to the public as the prized original. To the untrained eye, they looked nearly identical, but to a seasoned taster, the differences were stark. The fakes were sour, gritty, and lacked the smooth complexity of true Fiesole Bianco. The Formaggio di Fiesole Guild maintained an extensive network of spies and bribed officials who ensured that only the finest fakes would ever slip past the public's discerning noses. One legend even tells of a blind taster, a man whose taste buds were so finely tuned that he could tell the difference between real Fiesole Bianco and counterfeit just by the sound it made when cut with a knife. This taster became the stuff of local folklore, and his ability to spot fakes was said to be so uncanny that, for a time, it was rumored he could hear the cheese's secrets whispered as it aged in the cellar. You now find yourself walking through the guild hall, greeted by the guild's aging members, some with faces as round as the wheels they create, others with eyes sharp from decades of suspicion and secrecy. The walls are lined with crates, each containing different aged cheeses, and a few delicate Fiesole Bianco wheels are placed carefully in glass display cases like trophies of a long-forgotten war. A man in a patched velvet cloak steps forward and introduces himself as Aldo, the last of the original guild members still alive and keeping the tradition of cheese secrecy alive. He offers you a sample of what looks to be a Fiesole Bianco wheel, its smooth, ivory rind gleaming in the light. His hands tremble as he cuts it and hands you a sliver. The taste? Rich, creamy, and nutty. It's everything you've ever imagined in a cheese, its flavor both comforting and elusive, like the end of a perfect story. Aldo begins telling you the tale of the guild's rise to prominence. It's a story of ambition, of fierce competition, and of betrayal. The guild's power wasn't built on craftsmanship alone, it was built on control. The members weren't just cheesemakers, they were businessmen, marketers, and manipulators of public opinion. They used their influence to convince the people that their product was worth any price. They controlled the flow of Fiesole Bianco to the market, keeping the supply scarce and the demand insatiable. But, as is often the case in these dark stories, the pursuit of greed led to the guild's downfall. As more and more counterfeit cheeses flooded the market, the real Fiesole Bianco lost its prestige. The public began to question the integrity of the guild, and soon, their criminal activities came to light. Scandals erupted, trials were held, and members of the guild were forced to flee the city in disgrace. But some say the damage was already done. The reputation of Fiesole Bianco was permanently tarnished. Despite the scandal, Aldo claims the guild lives on, though not in the way it once did. Its members are scattered across the Tuscan hills, and its secrets have largely faded into history. Yet the recipe for Fiesole Bianco is still kept under lock and key in the vaults of the guild hall. Some say Aldo is the last person alive who truly knows how to make it, but even he is tight-lipped about it. As you leave the guild, the sun setting over Florence in the distance, you wonder how much of the Formaggio di Fiesole Guild story is myth and how much is reality. Was it truly a hub of criminal intrigue? Or was it simply the invention of an old world obsessed with the idea of secret societies and hidden power? What's clear is this: whether through art, crime, or sheer perfection, cheese in medieval Italy was never just a product, it was an experience. One that blended politics, passion, and betrayal in the most unexpected ways. And the legacies of those long-gone guilds continue to weave through the streets of Florence, echoing in the shadows and the alleyways, waiting for those who dare to uncover their secrets. With the sun dipping below the Tuscan horizon, painting the sky in hues of amber and pink, you leave Florence behind and begin the long trek south toward the coastal town of Amalfi. The journey winds through the lush hillsides of Campania, where the scent of salt water mingles with the faintest breeze of citrus groves. You're not just heading to any coastal town, though. No, you're aiming for the cradle of an infamous cheese rivalry that would make even the most hardened historian raise an eyebrow: the Great Mozzarella Wars. Now, I know what you're thinking: mozzarella? Wars? It sounds like the stuff of cheesy legends, right? Well, prepare yourself, because in Amalfi, things were anything but simple when it came to cheese. By the time you set foot in Amalfi, the townsfolk are already preparing for the annual festival in honor of their local cheese, mozzarella di bufala, a creamy, soft cheese made from the milk of water buffalo. The town is buzzing with energy. There are stalls, performers, and the unmistakable smell of fresh mozzarella being pulled from vats. You can hear laughter and clinking glasses, the air thick with the joy of celebration. But look a little closer. Beneath the surface of the cheerful festival, there's something else going on here. A bitter rivalry between two long-standing guilds, each claiming that they are the true masters of mozzarella production. One is based in the heart of Amalfi, while the other hails from a nearby village, Satara, just a short boat ride away. For years, the guilds have competed for the same markets, the same buyers, and the same prestige. They each claim that their mozzarella is the original, the one true creation, the pinnacle of Italian dairy artistry. Of course, such claims have sparked feuds that go beyond the culinary realm. Historians still argue whether the rivalry started with the first buffalo to graze on the Amalfi coast or whether it was a strategic move by the guilds to dominate the southern Italian cheese scene. Regardless, the competition quickly spiraled out of control. It wasn't just a matter of taste anymore, it became a matter of territorial dominance. One of the most notorious incidents occurred in the early 15th century, when a shipment of mozzarella from Amalfi was mistakenly swapped with a batch from Satara. The result was a scandal of epic proportions. The cheeses were so similar that no one could tell which came from where, and the scandal spread like wildfire across the entire region. Each guild blamed the other for the switch, and accusations of fraud flew faster than anyone could keep track of. The market was thrown into chaos, and the two guilds went to war, not with swords, but with mozzarella. It's said that, for weeks, the two towns' markets were filled with bribes, lawsuits, and even threats. Some locals recall seeing crates of mozzarella being smuggled across the coastline under cover of darkness, while others claimed that entire shipments of the prized cheese were intentionally left out in the sun to spoil, ruining both the reputation of the rival guild and the quality of their product. But the battle didn't stop there. As both guilds scrambled to prove their dominance, they resorted to increasingly bizarre tactics to win over the public. One guild hired a renowned artist to create a fresco depicting the origins of mozzarella, complete with a giant water buffalo standing triumphantly on the Amalfi coast. The other guild responded by commissioning a series of formaggio art competitions, where cheese sculptures of saints and famous figures from local folklore were put on display for all to see. Then came the ultimate showdown, the Great Mozzarella Trial of 1472. Held in the town square, this trial was more of a public spectacle than a formal hearing. The judges were a mix of local merchants, nobility, and cheese connoisseurs, each tasked with tasting the two mozzarella batches side by side. The challenge was to see which mozzarella would reign supreme in taste, texture, and purity. You can imagine the drama. The air was thick with tension as one judge after another took a bite, their eyes narrowing in concentration. In the end, no winner was declared. Both sides had their champions, and both sides were determined to keep the other out of the limelight. To this day, the mozzarella wars are a point of pride and ridicule in Amalfi. Some say it was all a marketing stunt to sell more mozzarella. Others claim it was a genuine struggle for recognition. Either way, the festival today is a blend of history and humor. As you wander through the market, you're approached by a local guide who offers to show you the remnants of the original mozzarella stalls. They're hidden behind a small alleyway, far from the boisterous crowds, where you can still find the ancient stone vats where the cheese was once made. As you sip a glass of local limoncello, You hear stories of the war from the mouths of old-timers, each with their own take on who started it all. Some say it was a plot by the Satara Guild to undermine Amalfi's reputation. Others insist that Amalfi was simply trying to protect its intellectual property, keeping the secret of their mozzarella-making process under wraps. Whatever the case, you can't help but laugh as the townsfolk debated even today, each side adamant that they are the true home of mozzarella. The truth, it seems, is as soft and elusive as the cheese itself. Quirky tidbit? Legend has it that the two guilds still secretly compete to this day in an annual mozzarella tasting duel, a clandestine event where the winners are crowned with a golden mozzarella wheel. The event is so secret that only a handful of high-ranking guild members know the time and place. If you ever find yourself in Amalfi during the right week, though, don't be surprised if you're invited to witness the spectacle, though they'll never admit that it's part of the mozzarella war's legacy. As you continue your journey through Amalfi, the sun now dipping low and the waves of the Mediterranean crashing in the distance, you can't help but think about the layers of history and cheese that you've encountered. From the power struggles of medieval Italy's guilds to the rivalries that shaped entire industries, cheese was never just a simple product. It was, and still is, a symbol of identity, of pride, and, sometimes, of fierce competition. As the night falls over Amalfi, a sense of tranquility settles in. The bustling streets of the festival gradually quiet down, and the soothing rhythm of the sea takes over the night air. You can still hear the distant laughter of festival goers and the occasional clinking of glasses, but the echoes are softer now, like whispers of a bygone era. There's something peaceful about it all, something that makes you reflect on the journeys you've taken, the cheese guilds you've encountered, and the strange legacies they've left behind. You stand on the balcony of a small cafe overlooking the vast Mediterranean, the moon casting a silvery glow over the water. It's hard to believe that just a few days ago, you were navigating the narrow streets of Florence, tracing the stories of ancient cheese crime rings, or sitting in the forgotten halls of Monte Cassio, where secret cheese recipes were kept under lock and key. Now, here you are, breathing in the salty sea air of Amalfi, your mind heavy with the tales of centuries-old rivalries and long-forgotten flavors. It's easy to forget just how much of Italy's history has been shaped by these seemingly humble guilds. You've seen firsthand how the power of cheese, of all things, could drive men to manipulate markets, wage battles, and even risk their lives. From the monopolies of medieval Florence to the secret cheese caves of Monte Cassio, each guild left its mark, creating a tapestry of ambition, betrayal, and fierce competition that was, in many ways, as potent as any political struggle. Yet, amidst all the drama and conflict, one truth remains undeniable. Cheese in medieval Italy wasn't just about food. It was about power, identity, and culture. It was the very essence of what it meant to be part of a community, of a region. The recipes that had been passed down for generations weren't merely instructions for making food, they were symbols of craftsmanship, pride, and the struggle for recognition. As the night deepens, you find yourself thinking about how those ancient guilds still influence the world today. The passion for preserving traditions, the battle for authenticity in the face of imitation, the way food has always been a marker of heritage, all of it lives on. You might be far from the grand halls of Florence or the secretive guilds of Monte Cassio, but the spirit of those cheesemakers remains alive in the modern artisans of Italy. Today, as much as in centuries past, cheese is still a symbol of craftsmanship and pride, a reminder of how food can be so much more than sustenance. You take another sip of limoncello, the tartness lingering on your tongue. The journey you've just taken through the history of medieval Italy's cheese guilds has been both enlightening and humbling. The rivalries, the trade secrets, the moments of intrigue, They all blend into a singular story that's as rich and layered as the cheeses you've learned about. As the breeze picks up and the soft sounds of the sea lull you into a comfortable daze, you begin to feel a sense of closure. The feuds, the guilds, the cheese-making techniques, all of it has come full circle. You've seen how it all connects, how each piece of history is part of a larger, intricate tapestry of Italian culture. And while you may never taste Cacio dei Monti or see the great mozzarella trials firsthand, you now understand how these seemingly simple foods became intertwined with the story of an entire civilization. With a final glance at the moonlit waves, you close your eyes and let the history of medieval Italy's cheese guilds fade into the background, the soft hum of the world around you lulling you into a peaceful, restful state. There's no need for any more battles over cheese or rivalries, just the calm, soothing presence of knowing that some stories are best left to settle in the quiet corners of history. Now, as you drift off, the whispers of those guilds, their victories, their losses, and their cheesy triumphs seem to fade into a soft lullaby. It's a fitting end to your journey, where food, history, and culture intertwined in ways you could have never imagined. And as you sleep, perhaps you'll dream of walking the cobbled streets of Amalfi again, where the ghosts of mozzarella rivalries still linger in the air, whispering their tales to those who will listen.